you can join. Yeah. We are about to start in a second. I think immediately you log in, then we'll start. All right, thank you so much. What do you want?
Writing pad, do you have, or should we ask? We can organize a writing pad.
Yeah, let me click.
Oh, okay. Sometimes Fancy, you're okay. You're like me now. Just keep it. So how big is the team at this point in time?
Later. Can you just move this?
Please take us on your photo. So you take the picture and you can let us complete. Colleagues will start in about 5 minutes or less, so please be patient. Alright, I think we can start. Good afternoon, everyone. I think most of you are not new to how we run our proceedings. My name is Masili from the National Press Club. So we'll basically start off with introductions, but also affording the Border Management Authority the opportunity to tell us a little bit about the entity, their mandate, and the launch that's happening early in October. And then from there, we'll take questions and answers. As per the norm, we would encourage that you introduce yourself when we do the question and answer session, but also tell us which media house you are representing. We are also streaming live on Facebook on the National Press Club page. And then you're welcome to also tweet us to all of you. As I've mentioned, my name is Musilo Khele. I'm sure you've read the brief that the Border Management Authority, which came into effect on 1st of April.
Day to the colleagues. As reflected on, grade 1 comes from an entity called the. But before we actually reflect on the entity's establishment, I suppose it is very much critical to reflect on a point of view. I think the colleagues will fairly be aware that at the point of transition in 1994, as a country, we fairly inherited what is called a multi-agency approach to the ports for those officials to get to the ground and effectively do work on the very much active at the port. You will be aware that the Department of Home Affairs has been at the ports of entries of the Republic, and on that of health had also deployed officials on the ground to do work in what we call port health responsibilities. But of course the Department of Forestry, Fisheries and the Environment also deployed officials on the ground to deal with we have an entity, the South African Revenue Services, that is also present at the ports, primarily doing customs related responsibilities. Additional to that, we do have, as you will know, the South African Police Services, who had fairly been doing also access control in as far as the port environment is concerned. And of course we do have the South African National Defence Force, whose contribution is more on the borderline. So that has fairly been a multi-agency approach that we had fairly deployed in as far as border management is concerned. And that particular approach, having been implemented for almost 29 years now, we are able to agree that it has brought a lot of challenges, and that include the fragmentation in as far as border management activities are concerned. It has brought a lot of silos on the environment in as far as the work is concerned, but also it has fairly facilitated corruption in as far as the ports of entry is concerned. So on that basis, as you will know, there has been that recommendation that we need to move away from a multi-agency approach into adopting what we call an integrated border management mechanism, through which we needed to have a single command and control at the ports of entry, but effectively implementing a multiplicity of functions coming from a number of legislative frameworks on the basis of doing the work of border management. So to that extent, I think you will be aware that for almost 15 years there has been a discussion to try really to have this border management authority established. And indeed, the ultimate breakthrough happened in July of 2020. As you will remember, the President enacted the Border Management Authority Act into law, and that gave rise to the appointment of the commissioners into the organization so that they start the journey of establishing the Border Management Authority. So I suppose you'll also be aware that in the financial year 2022-2023, this Border Management Authority was fairly incubated within the Department of Home Affairs as a special branch, within the department, with the view of it being established. So what we have been doing in the past financial year, that is 22-23, we had actually been in a journey of establishing this Border Management Authority. So we had to do two key things in that particular process. The first one was to start a process through which we are going to be, or we were going to be, moving the functions of border management on the ground from those departments into the Border Management Authority, but via the Department of Home Affairs as the department entrusted with the responsibility of incubating the Border Management Authority and ultimately getting it established. So on that basis, a lot of legislative frameworks coming from all the four departments, as mentioned, had to be put on the table for the President to move those functions from those departments via Section 97 of the Constitution, which effectively means that we had to move the functions from those government departments for accountability and implementation purposes to the Border Management Authority, and that happened during the course of 2022, around October or so. So that basically started the process of us having to start moving a process of having to migrate the staff complement that had been working for all those departments from those departments towards the Border Management Authority. Then the other thing that we had to do, whilst we were working administratively to move the staff complement from the four departments into the BMA, in compliance with Section 197 of the Labour Relations Act, as you will be aware, we also had to capacitate the authority. And the capacitating of the authority fairly meant the employing of the new people into the authority was incubated under the Department of Home Affairs. And I think on that basis, you might have seen that on the 15th of July 2022, we had to then launch the 201st cohort of the border guards, which was part of the capacitation. But of course, additional to that, we had to also bring on board a number of officials who had to come into the Border Management Authority for back office work. That will include the colleagues that had to do administrative work, such as the assistant commissioners that we brought, one for corporate affairs. We brought one, for example, responsible for what we call the National Targeting Center. We brought one responsible for specialized functions, which is effectively all those 4 functions that I've defined. So all of that work is what we've been doing in the financial year 2022-2023. So our target date fairly was that by the 1st of April 2023, we should be able to get the colleagues moving out of the departments into the Border Management Authority. And for that to actually happen, there has to be a lot of administrative work that has to be done with the 4 departments, directors generals, the chief financial officers, together with their ministers. And ultimately, we also had to do administrative work with the National Treasury on the basis of the movement of budgets from those departments into the Border Management Authority. So all of those administrative things actually were done to the extent that on the 1st of April, officially, the Border Management Authority then kicked in as a Schedule 3A public entity, an autonomous public entity responsible for the implementation of border management responsibilities in the jurisdiction or in the country. The Department of Agriculture, around 370 of those coming from the Department of Health, and around 23 of those coming from the Department of Forestry, Fisheries, and the Environment. When you put all that number together with the 200 board of 2,100 by the 1st of April. So this is the staff complement that is scattered across the 72 ports of entries of the Republic, that 53 of those are left of the Border Management Authority Act. If you have time to go and check Section 5 of the Border Management Authority Act, particularly subsection A, subsection B, subsection 3, you will actually find the responsibilities there of the Border Management Authority being very much clearly provided for. Now, if we can start with Section 5, subsection A, our responsibility is to facilitate and manage the legitimate movement of persons at the port of entries as well as the border law enforcement area. So if you look at that function, you will realize that it's about people movement, and that people movement will cover issues of immigration, which has been done by the Department of Home Affairs, which we have taken over, together with the port health issues, meaning the movement of persons who are supposed to be healthy and the people who are not supposed to bring sicknesses into the Republic, and that is port health responsibilities. So that is subsection A, and we've taken over that responsibility as we speak. And to this extent, I can indicate that from the 1st of April, we have been doing this work up to this point. Now, subsection B tells us that we have to facilitate and manage the legitimate movement of trade across our ports of entry as well as the border law enforcement area. So there you will realize that we've taken 2 key responsibilities. One, the movement in terms of trade. There has to be compliance in terms of agricultural biosecurity, which is now the functions that used to be done by the Department of Agriculture, together with the movement in terms of environmental biosecurity, protecting the country from any environmental biosecurity threats. And to that extent, then we can agree that we've taken over those responsibilities from the Department of Forestry, Fisheries, and the Environment. Now, the interesting part is subsection C, because it tells us that as we do this work, we need to cooperate and coordinate our work with the 3 principal organs of state. And the reason why the law has to be explicit on that is because those do have a critical mandate that has to be retained, but ultimately they do have a stake in the border management space, and we have to coordinate our efforts. The first one is the South African National Defence Force. You will be aware that according to the Constitution, your Section 200 or so, you look at the Defence Act, it tells us that the responsibility of the Defence Force is to ensure border protection. They have to ensure border safeguarding. But at the same time, they have the responsibility of protecting the country's territorial integrity. That responsibility as it stands constitutionally and in terms of the Defense Act stands, and to that extent we have to cooperate with them in as far as them doing that particular responsibility. Now, in terms of the South African Revenue Services, you will be aware that they are responsible for the customs work, as it were, and ultimately do the relevant tax collections that are critical on the basis of the work that they have to be collecting the monies from those respective exporters, as it were. So if you look at that, then you will realize that we have to cooperate with the South African Revenue Services, as it were, and of course the third one is the South African Police Services. So if you were to look also constitutionally, or you are to look at the South African Police Services Act, you will realize that the role of the police is very explicit. It's about crime prevention, it's about crime combating, and it's around doing the broader investigation of crime, as it were. Now, when we are talking about border management, you will realize that the members of the South African Police Services had been deployed at the port environment to do what we call border access control. So that responsibility, as per the Border Management Authority Act, belongs to the members of the officers of the Border Management Authority. But because as of now we do not have full capacity to take over that responsibility, we have then opted to facilitate our work with the police, with the view that as we bring in capacity on board, we should be able to exit them out of the space. Now, what does it mean in terms of our working relationship? Now you will realize that in terms of the Act, Section 27 tells us that we had to sign the implementation protocol with the three organs of state, as I've defined them: Defense, Police, and SARS. That defines how we are going to be interacting with each other in doing the work on the ground. All of that has been done, and there is no any confusion in terms of the work that we need to do. In terms of the four government departments that we are doing the work on their behalf on the ground, there we have actually signed service level agreements with them, which basically defines what is it that we are going to be doing as the Border Management Authority on the ground on behalf of those departments in question. The context that we need to also put in this conversation is that the department retains their policy and legislative making responsibilities in as far as these functions are concerned. Therefore, the BMA is a frontline structure whose responsibility is to implement those respective laws on the ground. What the Border Management Authority model does, it actually separates a player from a referee, to the extent that we should be able to start addressing broader issues of corruption. A typical example in this relationship is, one, if you were to look at the Department of Home Affairs from a policy-making point of view, they are still the department who interact with their counterparts globally and still make determinations which people need to come to the Republic with visas, which people need to come to the Republic without visas. They are still the ones who issue out all of those relevant documentation as a department, including the travel document to the South Africans, as it were. Now, how do we now come in as the BMA? So once the directives are very clear of saying this country must come with visas or not, we are just to get that directive and make sure, as the officers of the Border Management Authority on the ground, we do the work in line with that particular directive and make sure indeed when those people arrive at the post they have the relevant visas that they're supposed to be having. In that instance, in instances where we have people who will be coming with fraudulent visas on the ground, we should be able to intercept those and get them returned in as far as our work is concerned. So that is just a typical example. Another typical example I could give in terms of the relationship between ourselves and what we call the mother departments. Our relationship with the department, let's say for example of health. The Department of Health, as the signatory to the World Health Organization, for instance, they are still the one who will be responsible to indicate that people from country X needs to come with proof of yellow fever vaccination certificates, for instance. In this instance, the typical example is those people coming from South America, your Brazilians, your Argentinians, and all of those colleagues from that side. So when they arrive at the port, we will require that because we are instructed by the mother department that we need to have them. The last example I can give with the Department of Agriculture, for instance, is that if as we stand now, being one of the importers of red meat from Botswana, if there is an indication that there is foot and mouth disease outbreak in Botswana, as an example, and the department has to send an instruction that we must then ban the importation of red meat into South Africa in that jurisdiction, unless we get a different directive. So those were just practical examples that demonstrates the relationship between us as the Border Management Authority, as well as the Border Management Authority that had actually happened in the recent past. So if you can just, for example, look at the biggest challenge that we used to have, which is instances of stolen vehicles that has been hijacked into the Republic with the view of exiting the jurisdiction, because there are some people who might have bought those outside our jurisdiction. We were able from July last year, after the deployment of the border guards, intercept around 139 of the stolen vehicles, to the extent that we had to then hand them over to the members of the South African Police Service detectives for them to be able to go into the Republic and do investigations and make sure that the cars are returned to their people, and of course those that had been responsible are brought to book. So that is the interface. Additional to that, you'll be aware that we were able to intercept around 35,000 individuals who were trying to subvert our immigration laws and enter the country illegally. And to that extent, we had to have those people arrested, and we had to get those people deported back into their respective jurisdictions. Over and above that, we've denied entry to around 95,000 individuals who had been declared undesirable for various reasons, trying to enter the Republic. Some of those, for instance, are people who had been kind of wanted by their respective jurisdictions for having committed any kind of crimes out there. And to that extent, we had to make sure that they are actually returned to their jurisdictions for them to face whatever the case might be. So those are some of the issues that are very much critical. Now, the issue of BMA to be launched. Let me indicate that last year on the 15th of July, what we did was not to launch the BMA, it was just to unveil the first cohort of the 200 border guards. That we did, led by the Minister of Home Affairs, Dr. Aaron Motsoaledi. I suppose you might be able to have seen that yourselves. So on the 1st of April, it was just a date that demonstrated the day through which the BMA started operating legally as a Schedule 3A public entity. But because the BMA is the third law enforcement authority in the Republic, following after the Defense Force and the police, and as you will know, the Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces in the Republic is the President of the Republic. Therefore, it is upon the President of the Republic to launch the Border Management Authority to the nation. To say that we've been having 2 and now we have 3. By the way, the establishment is embedded in Section 199, subsection 3 of the Constitution. So to that extent, it is indeed to come through as the third national armed law enforcement authority. The launch will be happening, officiated by the President on the 5th of October 2023 in Musina Showgrounds, and that is next week, Thursday. And of course, the President will be there to run with the entire process. There are a number of rituals that the President will have to be doing, and he is going to commission them officially on the day. Secondly, the President is going to rank the officials of the Border Management Authority, but he is going to only rank the top 3, which is the Commissioner and the 2 Deputy Commissioners, 1 for operations and 1 for corporate services. And he will rank them, and after that, there will be subsequent events for the commissioners to rank the rest of the staff complement, as it were. So that is basically the essence. And of course, the last thing the President will do will then be handing the authority in the form of a sword, which will then have to be handed to the Commissioner of the BMA, demonstrating the transfer of power from him as the Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces, and in this instance being the Border Management Authority, to the Commissioner, for the Commissioner to be able to exercise that responsibility of the implementation of the Border Management Authority as provided for. So that is in short, Madam Nsidi and the colleagues, the story of the Border Management Authority. Thanks.
Thank you so much for the comprehensive summary into the affairs of the Border Management Authority. We're going to open for questions, colleagues. As I've mentioned, please introduce yourself in the media house you are representing. I'm sure you've noted quite a lot of aspects that Dr. Masia Bado has highlighted in his address. More importantly, the fact that they will officially have a launch on the 5th of October, which will be officiated by the President. And I suppose there's no guessing why it has to be in Musina, but you can tell us more about all of that as you pose your questions to him. We'll also take questions from our colleagues who are joining us virtually via our Facebook Live.
Tabi Sokoba from Eyewitness News. Commissioner, I have a couple of questions. I think the first question, it has to do with, especially coming towards the festive season. There is a perception, especially, obviously all of us in the media will be going to the Bright Bridge. There is that perception that people have easy access to our borders. They go in and out, not legally. So I just want to know that, firstly, is there a heightened sense of, especially during the festive period, is there a heightened sense of security in our borders? And just secondly, that perception, is it founded in any sort of truth that our borders are porous and people have easy access in and out? My other question is there a plan to train more BMA guards, and is there sort of a timeline on when we can expect more guards, and how many guards are they going to be trained? And just lastly, since obviously you've come into this position, what are the sort of maybe challenges and shortfalls that you've sort of identified within South Africa's ports of entries? I say this because I think a couple of weeks ago, the Minister of Home Affairs said they'd be launching this big project to upgrade, I think, 6 of the ports of entries with the latest technology. So I just want to know, what are the challenges and maybe shortfalls that you've identified with the security at our ports of entries? Thank you.
Would you perhaps like to take these 3 before we move on to the next set?
Yeah. No, thank you very much, Celia, and thanks, Tabiso, for the questions. I think one thing that is very much factual, and I don't think we can try to defend it. I mean, even the Minister of Home Affairs himself had fairly admitted that reality, and that is what you describe as a perception, that the borders are porous. So indeed, that has always been a challenge, and I suppose it is for that reason that in the wisdom of the leadership of the country, there was that decision to establish an integrated border management authority platform. And the intention is to start to deal with those realities. Because indeed, as I've indicated, over the last 30 years, or 29 years as it were, there has been a multiplicity of challenges arising from the manner and the way in which we've handled the issues of border management. So at the end of the day, I suppose we should be able to consider the point that says the establishment of the Border Management Authority is the first recognition of that reality, and therefore it is therefore the challenge going ahead of the Border Management Authority to make sure that we start doing things differently and ultimately start to address those issues relating to the porousness of the borders, as always described. In terms of the question of how many border guards are we planning to train and all that going forward, but I said initially that we are sitting at a staff complement of around 2,100. That's within that number, obviously the majority of those are specialized officials that are handling issues of immigration, environmental, health and agriculture. It is only 221 that are conventional border guards, meaning the law enforcement team in the environment. So indeed, it is in the interest of the Republic and of course the interest of the authority to increase the numbers on the ground. So what we can indicate now is that we do have around 400 of the border guards that are in training. They are being trained at the RTMC College that is the Road Transport Management Corporation. We have a partnership with them, and they're being trained there. And of course, they will also be part of the launch next week on Thursday, those 400. But additional to that, as you will be aware, we do also have the mandate by law to operate within the ocean environment, as it were. There we are basically talking about the 9 seaports that I've spoken about, but also in terms of the coastline. It is for that reason that we also have enrolled for now at least around 50 of the coastal guards that are also at training, and they are also going to be part of the launch. So the intention over time, obviously depending on the available resources, we should be able to do incremental enrollment of the border guards into the Border Management Authority as we go forward. But of course, one thing that is also very much practical is that as we do that from a human resources point of view, we also need to be bringing technologies into the space with the intention to supplement the work that we are supposed to be doing, but and ultimately be able to indeed ensure that we contribute towards the legitimate movement of persons, because that is our mandate. Effectively meaning that something illegal should have to be countered. Now, in terms of the challenges, there are a multiplicity of challenges when it comes to the port environment. I think one of the main one which the Minister of Home Affairs always reflect on is the issue of the design of the current ports of entries, as it were. And I think on that basis, we will all appreciate that the ports were really built during the time of the apartheid past, and the nature of the design was purely looking at issues of security, but not much about trade facilitation. It is for that reason that if you were to drive on the N4 corridor to Libombo, for instance, you can have a double lane, you get to the port, it strangles it through. And that is why it becomes very much difficult to better facilitate trade. And if you were to look again, even at Bay Bridge, for example, on the N1 towards Mozambique, towards Zimbabwe, you will also realize there that we do have the same issue of strangleness. It is for that reason that we took this decision to say we need to redesign and redevelop our top 6 commercial ports and be able to open them up through a public-private partnership, and that is what the Minister announced a few weeks ago, to be able to deal with that. Now, over and above the issue of just the constraints at the port of entry, we have instances where our officials really are kind of, staying in park homes, some of those without windows and all of that, and that is very much unbearable, particularly considering the criticality of the work they do out there in the bushes, effectively taking care of ourselves. So to that extent, we are also looking at getting some private partners going to the future to develop staff quarters that are very much rational and all of that. So those are some of the real challenges relating to infrastructure and otherwise. But of course, one of the issues is about the fragmentation of our systems that are existing. If you were to go to the port, you will realize there will be systems that are more police-based, there are systems that are Home Affairs-based, there are systems that are SARS-based, and all of those kind of issues. And part of what we need to do, obviously, as the Border Management Authority, is to build an overall system to be able to integrate the multiplicity of those systems so that we can then be able to enhance better border management, as it were, with integrated systems going forward. Thanks.
Thank you.
Hi, it's Mariska from The Citizen. Commissioner, I just want to find out in terms of corruption, how are we going to ensure that the BMA stays corruption free? I mean, looking at all our other departments, it wouldn't be hard to point out tenders, corruption, money going missing, and. How will this new entity be protected? Is there any plans? And then the other question is, let's say there are, officials caught partaking in corruption, letting people over the border or whatever, how will they be dealt with, Thank you.
Francis Lwamachata from Progressive Independent News Agency. Maybe just to also add on Mariska's question. Yes, you spoke about one challenge being corruption. And now, when these people are caught, either crossing the borders illegally or where do you take them? Are you going to have your own facilities where you're going to hold them, keep them, and have them prosecuted? Or are they then going to be transferred to the South African Police South African Police Services cells as it is now? Thank you so much.
Yeah, no, that's great. Thank you very much for those questions. You see, Mariska, the issue of corruption really is one of the real challenges in the Republic. And of course, in the border environment, it has been very much rife. And one of the basic facilitators of corruption in the space has been the fragmentation. Just to start there, it has just been the fragmentation. For instance, you will find an individual from a particular department busy facilitating people, as it were. But the person from another department cannot intercept them and say, but what's happening? Because, I mean, these are my people, and I report to HQ, to head office, and who are you to be asking me, and stuff like that. So that model of fragmentation in terms of the application of a multi-agency approach, it practically facilitated corruption. Now, by just doing the integration on its own, it is the first step toward addressing the issues of corruption. How so? One, each and every port is then to be led by what we call a port commander. And that particular commander takes accountability for all the functions in the port across all of the various work streams. Meaning that if there are anybody from any of the work streams, for example, walking around with people, in the level of the command and control mechanism, they should be able to understand, but who are these people and how did they come to this particular space? And that on its own, it should then be able to start having some bit of effect in terms of corruption. That's the first one. The second issue, obviously, is the issue of automation. Once we fully achieve the deployment of technologies that we are envisioning, or that we are looking at procuring, once you are able to start making sure that those technologies are starting to be working in the manner they are supposed to work, then there's going to be very little human intervention, and that on its own is going to assist us to start dealing with people who might want to subvert the system. I think you will be aware that as we speak now, through the Department of Home Affairs, we are rolling out what we call the biometric movement control system, which was not there before. Basically what it means now is when somebody arrives at the port, they need to have their fingerprint taken as part of the biometric, and that gets juxtaposed against their passport, which must be machine readable, and that on its own is a step towards addressing instances where people were walking into the Republic with passports then that were not machine readable, or it was not a requirement, by the way, at that time. But similarly, people would come without any fingerprint as well. That is why it was a bit easy to literally give whatever to an individual that is part of the value chain. But once all of these issues are automated, then you have a different ball game. But the most important issue, Mariska, is that I wanted to move into the preaching context, but Section 13 of the BMA Act, it does indicate that everybody who is to be deployed and work within the Border Management Authority must actually get fully vetted and be able to get the requisite vetting protocols, as it were. So that on its own starts to facilitate the process through which, when everybody is vetted and we have taken stock of their possessions, we should be able to do annual lifestyle audits on them. To the extent that in instances where somebody is now ultimately starting to amass some kind of wealth outside their actual income bracket, we should be able to start checking as to what is going on. So that on its own is a bit of a step in the direction of assisting us in dealing with all of these issues. Now, when it comes to issues, for example, about tenders, I suppose that is now more at head office level, at our regional offices and all of that. I will say that the BMA is one of the law enforcement authorities. Most of the procurement, particularly for the tools of trade, are going to be embedded through the AMSCO system, meaning we have to then be tabling our requirements to AMSCO, and then AMSCO, as they do to the Defense Force, as they do for the police, as they do for correctional services, they will also be doing the same procurement for the BMA. And to that extent, in the context of the BMA itself, there wouldn't be much of that opportunity. But we do know for the procurement of other things, those opportunities can actually be available. But in terms of the mechanisms and the accountability metrics that we put on the table, we should be able to detect those as quick as possible and get to deal with all those issues. Now, the issue that you're also raising is around officials caught taking bribes, as an example, as to what happens with them. Obviously, when officials are being caught taking bribes, in many instances up to this point, most of those officials have to go through the process and most of those get fired. The colleagues, even for example, who had been part of the value chain, will tell you of the numbers of the people that had fairly been fired, who had been found to be subverting the processes and allowing people to enter the Republic illegally. I think you would have seen quite recently that because of the intensity of the mechanisms that we are starting to put on the table, we were also able to intercept around 63 Bangladeshis who were trying to enter the Republic illegally at Overtime. And in those instances, we had to do direct deportation on the spot and make sure that they are returned to their countries as it stands. Now, in terms of the issue raised by France, let me indicate it this way. In terms of the work that the Border Management Authority is doing, as I've indicated, is in the port of entry, but also in what we call the border law enforcement area. That is 10 kilometers inland when it comes to the land ports of entry. When it comes to the seaport, the sea borderline, 10 nautical miles inward into the sea, and of course 10 kilometers into land. Those are the areas of operation. Now, the issue of what do we do when we catch people who are trying to enter the Republic illegally. So what we do is we intercept those individuals, we get them arrested, and then we take them to the nearest port. We then administrate them by taking their fingerprint, and we therefore declare them undesirable, and we get them deported on the spot. So we are talking here about people who had subverted immigration laws. We are not talking here about people who had committed a crime. Now, in instances where within the border law enforcement area we intercept and arrest somebody who had committed a classical crime, let's say somebody shot somebody in the space, that kind of a person then gets handed over into the police, and the police will then activate their detectives. They will do all of the work that they do as the police. They will get the person into the holding cells and they will enter the entire process. But when it comes to people who subvert immigration laws, they get direct deportation. But for those that are outside the 10-kilometer radius, meaning inside the country, that is now the work of what we call the Immigration Inspectorate. Those ones, they work for the Department of Home Affairs. They are not part of the BMA. And BMA's mandate is only in the port and border law enforcement area, which is 10-kilometer radius inland and nothing else. So we don't necessarily work out there inside the country. We will not be found in Joburg city center there trying to say we are looking for people who are in the country illegally. That is the work of the inspectorate, which is in the Department of Home Affairs, which will then do the work with the police. Our work is in the ports of entry. If you are to look at OR Tambo as a port of entry, our jurisdiction there is within the entire port and 10 kilometers out of it, meaning that your Captain Park areas are part of our area of work in instances where there are people there around the port which we might need to do some bit of work on them. And I think you will know the process of the inspectorate. Once they arrest people, they take them to Lindela, they get them through the court system, and they follow the process of deportation. That is the Home Affairs and the inspectorate work. Our case, we do direct deportation on the spot as it stands.
All right, Dr. Masiapato, I've got 3 questions here. Came through Twitter. So the first one is, what is the working relationship currently with the stakeholders? There's a perception that some of these non-profit organizations that usually defend the illegal immigrants may stand in the way of the work that the Border Management Authority is set to deliver on. And then secondly, the question says, what is the working relationship with the other border management, they call it committees, I would say authorities, from some of the African countries, our neighboring countries, given the mammoth task of managing the border movements? So those are the two questions from my side. Do we have any other questions from the floor?
Since independent. Looking at the border management law enforcement portion, I want to throw it at something that happened in the country, the Table West Africa situation, and how the authorities will be able to perhaps deal with fugitives both inland and outland. Let's say they fall within the 10 radius. Has the biometric database for capturing fingerprint, how will that assist in that instance of preventing fugitive from fleeing justice in both from inland and maybe those who are coming from other countries?
That's great. So let's start with the relationship with the NGOs. You see, firstly, we do not have, up to this point, as the Border Management Authority, any, I would say, confusion or any pushback or anything when it comes to the work of the Border Management Authority. We don't have. And the reason why we do not have is because our responsibility, as I have articulated it in Section 5 A and B, it is about facilitating people movement. I wouldn't think if there is anybody who would want us not to facilitate the legitimate movement of persons. Because our role, as we speak now, I mean, us sitting here, there are people who are busy flying into the Republic across all our 9 international airports, whether it's OR Tambo, whether it's Kinshasa, whether it's Cape Town, whether it's Bloemfontein, and we facilitate them in thousands on a daily basis. They're coming into the Republic. We do the same for those people that are supposed to be exiting the Republic. As we speak now, sitting here, that is busy happening. I wouldn't think that there can be any NGO that would want us not to facilitate people. I think that will be very much unusual. So the other issue is, because we facilitate legitimate movement, then we have to counter illegitimate. And I wouldn't think there is anybody who can have an issue, exactly as Sindiso had indicated, for us to be able to counter the entry of a fugitive, somebody who is needed or wanted by Interpol because they might have done atrocities in other parts of the world. We have to counter their entry into the Republic. And honestly speaking, I wouldn't think there is any NGO anywhere that will actually have any issue in as far as that is concerned. So from where we are sitting as the Border Management Authority, we have not had any issue with any of the NGOs, as it were. Maybe it's because we are maybe 6 months old or 5 months old, maybe that will come. But even if it comes, we should be able to engage and be able to make sure that our work is understood. And by the way, maybe just to add this point, Musidi, so that at least people can also appreciate it. The Border Management Authority's work is not only immigration, it cuts across. We have to protect this country from environmental biosecurity issues. We have to make sure that the country is protected from agricultural, I would say biosecurity related matters. And we have to do the same in terms of people's health, as it were. So that is why we have port health officials in the ports of entry. Once you arrive at the port and you are supposed to be having a particular vaccination because of where you come from, if you come without it, we cannot allow you into the Republic, because it's not in our interest to have people bringing sicknesses into the Republic and ultimately infecting South Africans or any of the visitors in the Republic. So that on its own is a reality that we have to be doing. But similarly, we have to be making sure that people, even when they bring anything agricultural in the Republic, it has to be properly certified through the relevant phytosanitary certificates, to the extent that we wouldn't want any pests or any kind of invasive species to enter the Republic and be able to enter into our farming areas and go kill whatever that the farmers are trying to do and start having a problem of food security. So all of these issues are the things that we have to be doing. And that is why we have to also protect the country from any kind of invasive species that can have an impact on the environment. So the work is not just about people or immigration, but it cuts across into all of those various functions, as it were. Now, the relationship with our neighboring countries. One thing that we can all appreciate and agree is that border management cannot be a one-country matter. Border management, it has to be a bilateral, trilateral, and all of those, as it were. Now, If you were to look at the relationship between ourselves as the Border Management Authority, as well as our 6 neighboring countries, as it were, we have a very vibrant joint technical committee meetings that actually takes place all the time. If you can basically check now, even in the outer space as we speak now, you will realize that there is a binational commission that is currently taking place at DERCO, led by our President and the Prime Minister of Lesotho, and our team is there that had been engaging on issues of border management and the seamless movement of persons between ourselves and Lesotho as an example. And of course, we are doing that even with the rest of the other neighbors as it stands. For instance, if we were to look at the relationship that we are busy building with our colleagues in Mozambique, particularly in terms of trade facilitation, all of those discussions are taking place in the joint technical committees and all of that. And we are effectively working together to make sure that we address the issues. And I think the biggest challenge in the relationship is around the movement of economic migrants from the jurisdictions into the Republic. And all of that is work in progress as it stands. But however, as we speak, none of the countries, I would say, is projecting non-cooperation in terms of dealing with this work as a collective. And to that extent, I can indicate that everything is going well in the 6 months that we have been in the stable. And we do believe that as we go forward, as we go on doing this work, we should be able to strengthen fully these relationships operationally on the ground and make sure that we're able to move with speed. Now, in terms of Sindiso's point about the fugitives, our biometric movement control system is actually, it will be the criminal, the crime registered in the criminal registration system of the police, and you are actually trying to enter the country whilst wanted, then we should be able to get the attention of SAPS on you, and they should be able to deal with you. As for the other people from other countries, by the way, we have implemented what we call advanced passenger processing system, that we are actually implementing it together with Home Affairs. And what that system does, especially for air travelers, is to assess everybody who is trying to enter an aircraft destined for South Africa. To that extent, we are able to communicate with the conveyancer, which will be an airline, and be able to say that particular individual will not be accepted in the Republic, and therefore do not allow that person to board. I think you might have heard about those instances where people are refused to board aircraft as they try to go to other jurisdictions. This has been deployed by other jurisdictions out there. It's only us that we are basically starting to put some more effort in as far as this is concerned. And the intention for this is to avoid people who are not wanted even from arriving at any of our port. So that is more utilized for air travelers. But in terms of the travelers by road, those ones we pick them up on the spot in the port when we take their biometric assistance. Thanks.
Okay, last round of questions, colleagues.
There is a question from Sibahle Mota from Jacaranda FM online. In which time frame were the 35,000 illegal migrants and the 95,000 undesirable people intercepted?
Okay, any other questions? All right, I think that's our final question.
That's great. As I've indicated, is from the 15th of July 2022, after the deployment of the border guards. So when we put down that statistic, it was being put on the basis of demonstrating the contribution of the border guards since deployment last year in July. And I think that statistic was put on the table probably a month or so ago. And that was what we also gave to the minister when he was going to be reflecting in the parliamentary platform. So that is the duration, as it were. But of course, as we speak now, we are now working on the real structured statistics that demonstrate the work of the Border Management Authority from the 1st of April. And by the way, the biggest test for the BMA had already happened. And of course, the second one, which was considered the biggest, was the issue of the BRICS summit, that we had to facilitate the movement of a lot of heads of state, as you will be aware, a lot of international journalists, and a lot of people that came into the BRICS summit, and we did that, and everything went according to what we planned. And our next biggest, which is the real biggest, is going to be the December festive period, which is what we're going to be doing as the standalone Border Management Authority outside the departments, as it were. So thank you very much, Madam Musa.
Okay, it seems there's another question that just came
Yeah,
in.
I've got just one burning question that I wanted to ask. But Commissioner, what time frame can you give South Africans that our borders will be well secured and we are now going to have reduced illegal immigrants? What time frame are you giving South Africans? When can we say our borders are secured? And
maybe let me put it this way. When we talked about Border Management Authority some time back, somebody actually said, no, but the horse has bolted, meaning that the people had entered the jurisdiction illegally. And unfortunately on that one, I can say that it is the work of the inspectorate and the police to be able to deal with the people who might be in the country illegally. Now your question is, what time frame should we demonstrate or give to demonstrate that the ports are definitely not going to be porous, as it were? So what I can say is, if you were to look at the first 6 months that we have been busy with now, the biggest challenge that we're sitting with and we're busy with was to establish the organization, was to get it fairly grounded and all of those issues. The next cycle now, after the launch in particular from next week, we are then going to start putting more effort in terms of now the actual putting together of the deployments on the ground to deal with the issues. So one thing that I always put, which is actually putting the head on the block, by the way, although it might be a bit difficult to assess, because if the issue in the country is not that visible, it's going to be difficult to assess. But the people who stay at the or what we call the border communities must be the people to be able to demonstrate if there's a difference or not. And I'm at least talking about at least 12 months. From the point of the launch of the BMA, border communities must be able to demonstrate the difference. And how are they going to be able to demonstrate the difference? One, they should be able to indicate that the cross-border crimes that they have been witnessing all the time, whether the issue of stock theft, as an example, or some bit of basic crimes where people commit crime and exit the jurisdiction, they should be able to start seeing the difference. We do talk to border communities almost weekly, because subsection C of the Border Management Authority actually forces us to engage with border communities. That is what, for me, in 12 months' time, the border communities must be able to indicate to South Africa if they are seeing a difference or not. But in terms of what will be happening in the Republic, the only difference will be if in the country, the colleagues that are working inside are able to do what they're supposed to be doing, and the people don't return illegally. That should be the point of assessment for our performance. But otherwise, if that does not happen, it will be difficult to be able to assess. But like I'm saying, border communities will be the first point. But in answering your question, for that one, I can put my head on the block, and I know that media fellows do record the things. And I'm saying at least 12 months, people must start seeing the difference. Or maybe let me say this, by the way, you see, when I came in November, although it was under incubation in 2021, one of the biggest challenges that we literally had to be dealing with at the time was the chaos in every festive period. Literal chaos on the corridor. Libombo was the lead together with Bay Bridge, but also with Maseru Bridge and also with Fixbeck. Literal chaos when people had to go for Christmas period, when people had to go for New Year and all of that. And some of the colleagues who had been covering those chaoses as they stood at the time, from the media in particular, when they actually came for the 2021 December, 2022 April, and last year one, they were able to say, but now we see the difference. That chaos of people standing on the road in there and probably even having issues after 2 days and all of that had literally disappeared. The only place that is our biggest area of concern is Libombo. And that is why we will be interacting with the Mozambicans. And this period, or this festive period of December, should be able to demonstrate some differences. So I'm just showing you something about trade facilitation side, which we do together with SARS. And if somebody will say maybe they have not necessarily seen that, You can try by going to N1 today or even in December and see if there will be any chaos there on Bay Bridge for people sitting there for 2 days. From where I'm sitting, I was there just on Monday, last week. We don't have any of that. If you go to Maseru Bridge, you go to Fixback, we don't have any of that. And the reason why we have this ones in Libombo is primarily because of the challenges where people started avoiding going to N3 into Devonport, and people started avoiding going into Richards Bay Harbour, and all of the guys are pushing the mineral resources through the N4. So the volume is there, but the movement is there, but we know it's not at the level we want. So that is another area that you can be able to check, over and above just the immigration-related aspects. Thanks.
Okay, Dr. Masiapilo, as we wrap up, this is a subject very close to many South Africans. So what would be your parting message, just to assure South Africans who are very skeptical, whose view is that we have lost the battle when it comes to, call it facilitation of legitimate movement of persons?
Yeah, maybe what we need to say is just to say to South Africans that you see, we have been doing the same thing for, I would say, 29 years. And I think we are all in agreement that it had challenges and all of that. Therefore, BMA is presenting a different way of doing things. And therefore, I wouldn't think that it will be, in a way, wisdom to say this is not going to help or this is not going to assist the environment. From where I'm sitting, like Franz had asked, we can agree that we look at this and the performance thereof in the next 12 months. And then out of that, we should be able to assess and see if there is any difference that we're able to be bringing on the table. So for me, to South Africans, is to say, let's give this an opportunity. But from where I'm sitting, we should be able to demonstrate that impact, even with the limited resources that we have. And I suppose as we go forward, we should be able to invest a bit into the space so that the impact can actually even be more visible. So that's what I can say for now, Madam.
Thank you so much. That's where we leave it, colleagues. For those of you who are interested in joining us tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock, we'll be at SA Taxi, where the Minister of Transport, Minister Cindy Sochipula, will be launching Transport Month, but also delving into a discussion on the role of transport systems in the recovery of the country's economy. So that's at 9 o'clock at SA Taxi offices in Midrand. And then follow us on our social media pages for more news on our networking events. And some of you are actually not our members, so we encourage you to join us and be members of the National Press Club. Thank you so much. There's tea and refreshments at the